Hi everyone, I wanted to show you a Halloween face paint that I did recently. This is a Halloween school face paint. I started off by applying 2 layers of white face paint to my face, just leaving out the areas around the eye and the nose. Then, taking a black face paint, I then coloured in the eye socket area with the black. The reason I left it free from the white paint is just it's easier, so you can get a nice deep black colour around the eyes. Otherwise it mixes together and makes a kind of mushy grey colour. So the first layer always looks a bit pale, like a bit not very opaque, but I find if I do 2 or 3 coats of the black it tends to work out fine. Basically what I do is do the first coat quite thin, and then the second coat I apply thicker, and the way I do that is I put less water on the paint so the paint's more opaque. And that's how I can get it nice and solid and dark. So first of all, just go around in a basic eye socket shape like so, and then you start shaping it a bit. So I add a bit of a point at the top, and then a bit get it to stick out a little bit at the bottom on the outside edge. If you have any mistakes like that, you can just wipe it off with a baby wipe and then touch up the white paint later on. So here I'm just tweaking the shape a little bit so it kind of looks a bit like a cross between a raccoon and Batman. And then as you can see, if you wipe it off with a baby wipe, any smudges or any bits you're not sure about, you can always touch them up quite easily with some white face paint later on. I do touch up the eyes a few times during this, just where I'm tweaking the shapes, getting them to match as best as possible. Then what you need to do is paint the nose, and the way I do that is I do 2 lines down the centre of the nose, leaving a gap in the middle. That's where the white of the nasal bone is going to go. And then I just basically I'll go for a sort of, you know, like the Ace of Clubs card. It's that sort of Ace of Spades card. It's the spade sort of shape on a deck of cards. That's the kind of shape I go for the nose. And then I just make it a bit more thinner and pointed towards the top. But you'll see as I go along. This first layer, obviously it's not going to be perfect, but we neaten it up. I neaten it up as I go along. Basically this is to mark out the rough shapes and everything, and then what I do is go over the area a second time to make it nice and opaque. Sorry if it keeps going really bright on the camera. For some reason on my iPad, when I'm filming in front of the window and I move backwards and forwards every so often, the picture goes really funny like that, where it goes really pale and basically turns me into a ghost. If anyone knows what setting I can change, let me know. It's basically like an auto white balance that's going weird on my iPad. So if anyone knows how I can fix it, let me know. This bit is where I was impatient and doing the white bit. So basically I just ended up adding a grey bit in the middle of my nose. But that's okay. You can always go over it later on. It's not a problem. It's just a case. It's just annoying more than anything. So I wipe my brush off and then put a thicker layer of white paint on my brush, like so. Now I did smudge that bit there because obviously me being daft and rubbing it with my finger. But as you can see, I can remove any smudges with a baby wipe and then just fill in the missing paint. And that's how I fixed that bit. And again I smudged it. Obviously at this stage you can see where I've added the white paint around the outside with the small brush, but you'll see in a bit I'll use a bigger brush to blend that out so it doesn't look so strange and obvious. So obviously that looks a bit naff, but obviously once I've blended it in with my big brush it looks fine. And then I blended it around the nose and I've blended around the eye sockets a bit more as well. So that's the rough shape I'm going for. Then it's time to mark out where the cheekbones are and the jaw. So I start off by doing a line going down either side of my mouth. and then go around the rough shape of the jawbone, like so, and then go around where I roughly think the lower jaw would go. I was a bit off on the shape on this, but I did fix it later on. But basically you want an area like this that you colour in black on your cheeks. As you can see, I've gone in and fixed the shapes a little bit because it was a bit weird. But that's the shapes you want to create on your cheeks. I'm just tweaking it a little bit just to make sure it's a bit of a better shape for the lower jaw, because it was looking a bit odd. Now obviously it looks weird, like there's a section sticking up on the lower jaw, but obviously that's where the teeth are going to go, so you'll see that in a bit. And like I said, any mistakes, just go over it, wipe it off with a baby wipe, and then you can touch up the paint quite easily without any smudges or anything weird. So as you can see, I didn't like that bit, so obviously decided to tweak it again. Just make sure if you go over the area that you've wiped it off with a baby wipe that you apply the paint quite thickly, so don't mix much water with it. And this is where I hadn't realised I've got a bit of black paint on my brush. If I wave my hands in front of the screen, that's just me correcting the white balance, because it goes weird like that, and then if I wave my hand in front of the camera it goes back to normal. Silly, stupid automatic white balance. Then it's time to paint on the teeth, so I start off with a bunch of lines like so, roughly marking out where the teeth are going to be. So these are like obviously the gaps between the teeth. And then going around the bottom of the teeth, just to start showing where the teeth end and round them off a little bit. Then I go around the top of the teeth like so, to show where the top of the teeth is. If you get like a funny smudge of black paint like I did on that one tooth, don't worry, you can go back and fix it later on. You just get a bit of white paint and cover up any little smudgy bits you don't want with the black paint. Then it's a case of drawing the lower teeth, and the trick with these is make sure you go below your bottom lip, otherwise the teeth look like they're sort of bent up weird. So you have to go below where your bottom lip finishes to try and make the teeth look a bit straighter. And at this stage it's quite rough looking, and it's obviously later on I go in and neaten up all the edges. So what I did was I went around the edges where the paint was a bit thick by just applying some white paint around either side of the lines just to make them thinner. You'll see when I've done it later. So at this stage it looks very rough. As you can see, I'm putting a bit more black in between the teeth just to show where those teeth are. And that's me getting frustrated because the camera keeps changing, because that was making it so I couldn't see what I was doing as well, because obviously I'm using the camera like the front facing camera on my iPad, so I can actually see what I'm face painting as well. So when it goes all really bright and glary like that, I couldn't really see what I was doing. Then as you can see, I take some white face paint and I go over the edges of those lines just so I can tweak the shapes of the teeth a bit and just make those lines a bit thinner. I'm using my tongue to stick my skin, to poke the skin out on my mouth. It just makes it easy to get into all the little nooks and crannies. So this bit looks really funny, but that's how I did it to get the edges nice and neat. And as you can see, once I've finished neatening those edges and making the lines thinner around the teeth, it looks better. Then it's a case of going around the jaw. So I went around the jaw first of all like so, because I want to create on the neck like an area where you'll see two vertebrae showing. So obviously now I've got to do black face paint around the jaw and everything. For this I was using my little brush, which seemed to cooperate with me more than the softer brushes that I was using. You could have it as well if you wanted to, where you could make the edges of the skin on the neck look jagged, as if the skin's been ripped off and the skull's been revealed, but I didn't want to do that for this one. So here I'm just going around the areas that I want black around the skull and on my neck. It makes the skull stand out more, and obviously when I've got my hood up on my hoodie, it's going to cover my skin. And that's where I got a smudge and just started making it worse, so I had to get clean baby wipe out. By this time I'd got face paint all over my face and all over my hands. Then use the black face paint to go around the sides to define the shape of the side of the skull, and obviously the shape around the top of the skull. And if, like me, you've got a nice bright hairline, because obviously I'm really pale, you're going to have to go over that with the black face paint as well, right up to the hairline, like into the hair. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is into the edges of the hair where it's bright, where you can see my scalp. I'm having to cover that with the black face paint. And here's where I realised one side was bigger than the other, so I just needed to tweak it. And basically the way I do this when I'm doing face paint like this is any area that's going to show with the outfit on is what I paint. If it's not going to show, like if it's underneath where the outfit's going to go, I don't bother face painting it. That's me just checking it looked alright. And then I decided to go lower down on the neck because I want to show some vertebrae. And in hindsight, I shouldn't have coloured that bit in black, but never mind, I did fix it later on. I should have left it skin coloured so it would be easier to apply the white face paint, but never mind. And then that's just me refining the shape a little bit. Then I remembered I needed that bit white, so I used the baby wipes to rub off the black off my skin. I was going to sort of start off with making a sort of proper vertebrae shape, but I decided against it in the end. I just made a very basic shape for the vertebrae. So basically the more I faffed about with it, the more awkward it got. And then obviously as I hold my neck, like hold my head normal, it was squashing the shape of that vertebrae anyway, so it was looking weird. So I did tweak the shape in the end anyway. And then I'm just neatening up the edges here with the black face paint. Obviously it's ideal if you leave the white to dry for a bit, but I was impatient. And if you look at my eyes, you can see where the face paint sort of rubbed off a little bit on my eyes. I did go over the crease of my eyes a bit more later on with some face paint, and then put a bit of black eyeshadow over the top, just to make it stay in place a bit better. I've got quite oily eyelids, so obviously the face paint just falls off my eyelids basically. And then here I'm just looking on my phone at my previous face paint video from a couple of years back, just so I can see how I would have done the vertebrae before. So as you can see, I just did two basic shapes for the vertebrae in the end. Took advantage of my double chin, painting my double chin so you can see the vertebrae sticking out. And as you can see, I wasn't waiting long enough for the paint to dry, so that's why I ended up with quite a grey looking vertebrae bone there, but I didn't mind in the end. I did go over it anyway. So I lightened it up a bit with a bit more white face paint, like so. And then I used some more black paint in the middle just to separate the vertebrae a bit more, because I wanted it to show up a bit more like that. Then I put my hoodie up to check that the face paint would cover all the exposed areas. I did have to fold up the collar on my shirt as well. But obviously if you were wearing a costume, you'd make sure you painted anywhere that was sticking out the costume. Because this is just for a tutorial, I didn't worry too much about getting the costume right or anything. At the end of the day, all you need is like a big Grim Reaper cloak, which you can get from any costume shop, to wear over the top of your normal clothes and wear black clothes underneath. Or you could buy one of those skeleton suit all-in-one outfit things where it's like a little black jumpsuit thing with all the bones on. I was just doing it with the hoodie because for time and for the video. Then before I touched up the eyes, I used some black eyeshadow to go around the edges of the bones to create some shading, because I was feeling it was looking a bit flat. It wasn't looking quite how I wanted. And obviously this you can use the shading to add a little bit more detail to the bones. So here I'm making the top of the jawbone. That's me getting too hot and turning the fire off. I was finding I wanted to make it look like the jawbone was below the cheekbone, so that's why I shaded the top. And then I went around the teeth like so, because this is the sort of shapes you see of the skull. It's where the roots of the teeth are underneath the bone, and it creates these these shapes in the skull. And then I added some shading underneath the cheekbone. I just feel it makes it look a bit more 3D, makes it look a bit better. At this stage I decided to change my paintbrush because I wasn't liking the brush I was using. It took me a couple of seconds to find the brush I was after. If you see me waving my hand, that's me trying to get the camera to cooperate. So I'm adding some more shading just underneath the cheekbone. And see that bit of shading there just makes it look like the cheekbones are sticking out a bit more. And I added some shading around the eyes. And basically the way I shaded around the eyes is I'm kind of smudging the very edge of the black face paint where it meets the white face paint. Then I added some shading to the bottom of the lower jaw. I like the faces I pull while I'm doing this, it was quite funny. When I was editing it, you could see some really funny expressions on my face, it was quite funny. I'm just adding some shading just to tweak the shape of my lower jaw. And then adding some shading on the forehead with some eyeshadow as well, just to make it look like there's a bit more of a ridge above the eyes. This is a bit where I realised I needed to fold my colour up to make it work a bit better. But like I said, obviously if you're going out dressed like this, you would just make sure you covered any exposed areas. I didn't want to paint my ears because it's a pain to get all the black paint out my ears, and I was going out after doing this. So otherwise I would have painted, like used the black face paint on my ears as well. And then here I'm just going around the shapes of the top of the teeth, making sure there's a bit of a gap between the upper jaw and lower jaw, and just defining the shapes of the teeth a bit better. And here's where I'm putting some really strange expressions to get right into those spaces. So as you can see, I'm just shaping the bottom of the teeth now, making them look a bit more rounded. And then doing the same for the lower set of teeth, just rounding off those tops a bit because they were looking a bit too square. Like so. And then just tweaking the shapes of the teeth at the sides. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.